Well, hello there and welcome to a special festive Falkirk TV. Gary, first of all, before we go any further, Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you too.
It's been a bit of a kind of busy time of year just now. We're just conscious of the fact that there's been an awful lot going on behind the scenes at the club that respectfully the fans maybe just simply haven't been aware of. So first and foremost, thank you for your time coming along today to hopefully give some clarity on the kind of key matters behind the scenes. I guess the first point to kind of start with is it's been a fairly busy time of year just now. As I said, there has been a lot going on. The obvious question to start with is there's talk of an EGM coming up. Now, as a shareholder, I was at the EGM not too long ago, so can you talk us through what the need for that is?
Yeah, well, firstly, Merry Christmas to everybody, and I hope everybody had a good day yesterday as we sit here on Boxing Day. The reason that we wanted this update is to give people a refreshment of where we are and where things stand. We like to try and be as open as possible, but inevitably things get in the way of communications and things like that, so it's not for want of getting messages out there. So again, thank you for everything here. You're right, Lewis, the AGM was in October, which we'll touch upon as we go through this, I'm sure. We have some other urgent business that we still need to be able to address. Specifically two things. A buyback of shares, which we'll come back, I'm sure we'll come back to as well, from certain people, and the Rollins investment, Phil Carrie Rawlins investment, which is obviously vital for us going forward, and which we got the backing for in October. We don't actually need to have this an EGM or a shareholder vote to get the Rollins deal over the line. We got the approval for aspects of that in October. However, we feel it's really important to be transparent, and one of the things that was said to us at the time of the AGM is there are some things that people didn't not understand about the Rollins deal, so we want to give people the chance to be able to ask the questions and to be able to address them.
And I guess that's like an important point because, again, just as a shareholder, and I was reading some of the pack, I'll be honest, there was bits of it I understood and bits of the resolutions that seemed to refer to other resolutions I couldn't quite get my own head around, so I'm sure other fans were the same. And you mentioned the point there around the investments from the Rollins, so Phil and Carrie. What was the thinking behind that in terms of ratifying that? You touched on it there in terms of transparency, because from memory, the approval for something like 3 million new shares was already given at the AGM.
Yeah, that's right. So we have the ability to be able to get the Rollins investment in as it currently stands. But there was a few people asked us some questions, well, why so many shares? And that was a combination of, and it's a fair question, and we hadn't explained that as fully as we probably should with the benefit of hindsight. So it was a combination of how many shares do we need to be able to issue to the Rollins. So the Rollins money is coming into the club, not going into anybody else's bank account. It's coming into the club's bank account. So the Rollins money's coming in, so we need to be able to issue quite a lot of shares to them to give them the 26% that we've agreed that they can buy of the club. There's a chunk of shares being set aside for them. The rest of the 3.3 million was us looking at what do we want to be able to do with the club's ownership going forward. How do we broaden out share ownership and allow new investment to come in from our community, our fans, our supporters, who are the people who want to be able to buy more shares alongside the Rollins as well, or in due course, or in the future. So that's why we're looking to be able to explain that a bit more, give people the chance to be able to ask what they want, well, as I say, explain it.
Just as a kind of slight side note on that one, am I correct in thinking Phil and Carrie have said that they want a fixed percentage investment, that they don't want to essentially take over the club?
Yeah, they've been very clear from day one when I first spoke to them, probably March, that they don't want to control the club. They want to take an investment in the club, which at this stage is 26%. So they're buying 26% of the club at 40 pence per share. And I'll just re-emphasise it's 40 pence a share. They've asked for the option to be able to increase that shareholding because they recognise that the club will need more money as we build and as we go forward. So they've asked for the right to be able to increase that shareholding, but never to take control. So at the moment it's 26%. They'll have the right to be able to buy up to another 19% to take them up to 45%, but they're not wedded to that figure. That's the kind of ceiling that they've got on what they think what the perception would be right for them to be able to own the club. But they never want to go over 50, and they've made that absolutely clear.
So it sounds like there's been quite a bit of discussions with Phil and Carrie Rawlins around this then. can we always ask the obvious question, which is, where are we in terms of that deal in the background?
Yeah, all the details have been worked out. We speak to Phil Carrie weekly, if not more often than weekly, to be honest. And all the board have got regular contact with Phil Carrie, not just myself. So they've been hugely supportive of what we're doing and involved on an increasing basis in what we're doing, even although it's not formal yet. So where we are is the lawyers, our respective lawyers, have been working on the investment agreement. We're in the final stages of typical legal documentation, dotting I's, crossing T's, all that kind of stuff. That will be done in early January. We were hoping to have it done pre-Christmas. Things always get delayed, but it will be done in pre-January, and it will certainly be done before the AGM in January. And the money will land at the same time, and Phil and Carrie will join the board at that point as well.
Okay, so Phil and Carrie then joining the board, that kind of maybe takes us on nicely, because again, going back to my point, as a normal fan and shareholder, from reading the packs and looking at some of the communication updates, as Phil and Carrie are joining the board, I see we have a few departures from the board in the club as well. So Colin Liddell, Lex Miller and Paul Healy, I believe. How did that come about?
Yeah, so during the run up to the AGM, we had changed the board radically since I joined, and I'm now the longest serving board member, or Kieran's a lot longer than me, but and that's only a year and a half in my case. So we're a very new board. I was going to say young board, but we're not a young board. We're a relatively new board. So we, at the time of the AGM, or run up to the AGM, there was a lot of stuff going on, which we'll explore a wee bit further, Lewis. But there was a lot of stuff going on, including 3 shareholders who weren't on the board anymore. So Lex had stood down by that point, or he's made his intention clear that he was standing down. But there was 3 shareholders who had large shareholdings: Lex Miller, Colin Liddell, and Paul Healy, who had suggested that made it clear that they wanted to sell the shares. So in the run up to the AGM, we were dealing with that and their desire, understandable and right, to be able to sell their shareholding, and thinking about, well, how do we handle this and where do the shares go? So the board, when I say the board, the club, it has the right to be able to vet who buys shares and who holds significant shareholding. If we're talking a couple of hundred shares, a few hundred shares, that's everybody's right to be able to buy and sell shares between each other. But in the case that we're talking about there, we're talking round about 20%. Round about 20% of the club would have been, as in share ownership terms, the collective for these 3. So it's quite a very significant stake in the club. So it was very important to us to be able to control where do these shares go. So moving forward to the EGM, we've agreed with Paul, Colin and Lex that they'll sell the shares, but the club will buy them back and then we'll reissue them. Now, 2 aspects of that. We've agreed with all 3, and we're grateful for them agreeing this, that they'll sell their shares to us at 30p. That's at the same time as, remember, the Rollins are putting money in at 40p a share. And if we were all buying shares, which we will be in due course, we'll be buying them at 40p. So the guys have agreed to sell their shares to the club at 30p, and we'll reissue them at 40p. So the club's not going to be out of cash, but we'll need more investment in to be able to buy these shares at 40p.
So what you're saying, essentially, it's a bit of like a buyback and a reissue, but I guess that kind of maybe answers one question that I had in my mind, which was, we're living in this kind of COVID world, so to speak, just now. Things are very uncertain, and it was, at a time when not just our club, but every club in the country is kind of struggling for money. Why would the club use money to buy shares back from 3 particular individuals, regardless of who they were? Yeah,
it is complicated, and it is, the alternative was, and it's a valid alternative, is to let people outside just buy these shares. What we did have in the run up to the annual general meeting, though, was it was a group of people who wanted to buy that 20% plus shareholding and have a significant stake in the club that we weren't comfortable with, to be completely honest. So it was understandable that some of the shareholders wanted to be able to sell their shares, but the direction of the club was at stake as far as we were concerned and the board were concerned. We needed to be able to protect what the club is, a community-based, values-based, strong local voice in the community, something that's important to thousands and thousands of people. And we needed to be able to protect that and make sure that we're going in the direction we wanted to. Now if I contrast the Rollins investment with the ability for somebody else to be able to buy up, or a group of people to be able to buy up at 20%, because the Rollins are getting to buy 26, why wouldn't we let somebody else buy 20? The Rollins we have been speaking to, as I said, since probably around about March, going through who are they, what's their intention, what do they, how do they align with us as a club and our ambition as a club, what do they want for the club, and are they happy, and are we happy with them and them with us. So we spent a long time getting to know each other, getting to know the plans, making sure that the vision's shared. The opposite was true in the run up to the AGM and the 20% block that we're talking about. There were people there, we didn't know who they were, we had rumours, we had gossip, but we were determined that if somebody was coming in and buying 20% of the club, we needed to go through the same process as the Rollins. That wasn't happening. We drew a line under that and said, as we have the ability to be able to do, the best way for us to control that is for us to buy the shares and then to issue them to people who we know and have got the best interests of the club at heart, and that's what we believe we're doing.
And I guess just on that point then, would it, instead of doing the kind of, from a semantic perspective, the kind of buyback and then the release again, would it have maybe made sense to just allow those shareholders to sell to other sort of known Falkirk fans who are looking to build their own shareholding?
We've spoken to lots of people, local businessmen and others, who want to be able to invest, but all are happy to invest at 40 pence. The question was, well, actually, we've got a chance to be able to make a wee bit of money, about £45,000 for the club, by us buying them back at 30 and then selling at 40. Now, the deals that were being done to be able to sell shares before were at a variety of prices. They weren't at 40, they were at less than 40. And what we were faced with was, as I say, a group or individuals buying a block of shares at way under what we thought was the real value of Falkirk Football Club. Now, you could argue that we're still lowly valued based on what we're bringing in just now, but that's the reality of COVID, where we are in the leagues, everything. Our job is to drive that back up by everything being right in the club and on the pitch to drive us through the leagues. The value of the club will then go up and the value of the shares will then go up.
So I guess maybe the obvious question from some of the answers you've given already is, it's almost like in a way protecting the club from, let's just say, an unknown investor coming along and saying, I want X amount. Will the club have that protection through this new model? So if, hypothetically, if somebody appears out the woodwork tomorrow, there's 500 fans who all want to buy shares, but there's also somebody who says, here's X £1,000, I'd like 10% in the club. Does the club then have the right to say, well, let's do almost a bit of due diligence to say, who is this person and what do we know about them?
Great question, Lewis. We don't only have the right, we have the obligation. On behalf of all Falkirk fans and shareholders and supporters, I'm speaking as one myself, staying locally and so on. We have the obligation to make sure it's the right people investing for the right reasons. And a horrible phrase, but not letting the club fall into the wrong hands. We've seen that in a lot of cases in Scottish and English and international football. That's not going to be us. Not as long as we can try do our best to make sure it isn't us. So we take care. We've got an obligation as a board. We're only custodians of the club for other people who are coming in future generations. So it's our duty to make sure that the right investment is attracted for the right reasons and the right people. Jokingly, through all this stuff that's been going on for the last few months, and we're through it all, or coming through it, and we're almost there on the other side of the Rollins investment. But jokingly, over the last few months, the individual that's been mentioned most, if he turned up with 10 million quid and wanted to invest in the club, was Donald Trump. Would we want Donald Trump as our majority owner? No, even if it was 10 million quid. So it's a jokey aside, but it's a useful thing for people to keep in mind. Who are the right people to have within Falkirk Football Club? That's what we've been tested against, and it's our obligation to be able to deliver on.
to be fair, I think Donald's going to have some time on his hands from next month from what I'm hearing, so, never close the door, but we'll see what happens on that one.
Exactly.
Sticking with that kind of topic of generally investment in the club, at the AGM it was mentioned a fans share issue, as well as potentially groups of local business people who all wanted to invest in the club, and you mentioned it earlier on as well. Can I ask what, or rather how, are things progressing on that front? And is there any news you can share with the fans?
Yeah, we still want new investment. We still want fan investment. And whether that's as groups of fans coming together and a new supporters organisation, which is still ongoing, and I know talks are still ongoing with that. Not from the club's point of view, we've said to the fans organisation, put yourself together, organise yourselves, and if you want to be able to invest, we're more than happy with that. But it's important to us that that's a fan-led initiative, not a club-led initiative. We endorse that approach, and we're happy with that approach. That comes with a recognition that if a fan supporters organisation comes together, they deserve a seat at the board. So that's built into the new Articles of Association that were voted on at the annual general meeting. So we want fans to be able to invest on new money to be able to flow into the club, in addition to the Rollins money, as do Phil and Carrie Rawlins. That's really important, and that's been one of the tests that we've applied there. And it was a difference between what we learned about the rumoured group from before. So we're, again, all on the same page, a phrase that we use often. So, yeah, that's open to that. Now, the 3.3 million, as said earlier on, some of that goes to the share issue for Phil and Carrie Rawlins, and some is for other people to be able to invest.
Okay.
Legally, and it gets awful technical, Lewis, so I apologise, legally, we can't go out there and say who wants to invest. We've got to do it differently. So what we will be doing is to say to people, if you want to invest, come in and let us know. So it has to be people saying to us, we want to invest, rather than us going out with a booklet and saying, here's Falkirk Football Clubs you want to be able to invest. Legally, it's just a different process. But that is ongoing. So we want to build up fan ownership, supporter ownership. We want the Rollins investment, and we want those who already have shares to feel the valued part of the club that they are. To be honest, if the fans and the supporters and the shareholders hadn't voted in the numbers that they did at the annual general meeting, we could have had the wrong people. And it was clear to us, and that's not to say that Paul Healy, Lex Miller and Colin Liddell are the wrong people. They're not. That wasn't the case. It was others external to Falkirk who wanted to be able to buy into Falkirk. And that's why it got a bit messy. All we're saying to these guys is, we recognise that you want to be able to sell your shares, and you're doing us a good deal. So that's great. We're very, very happy with that. But going forward, who wants to buy shares in Falkirk? Falkirk supporters, people who have the best interests of the club at heart, and we want more of them.
You've mentioned when we've spoken in the past the analogy about the kind of three-legged stool, the outside investors, fan investment and so on. So from what you're saying there, in terms of as long as the right process is followed, is that very much still the case then? And essentially, as long as it's the right investment, the door is wide open to that? Absolutely.
You described two of these legs very well. The third leg is people who have got a bit more money, who want to be able to invest. Local businessmen, those kind of things. So we're in regular dialogue with a lot of people and saying, do you want to be able to invest? They've been great and they've supported us. So that's and supported us through the AGM and everything that we're trying to do. So that's been brilliant. Some people have different opinions about who should be playing right back and who should be playing centre forward, but that's usual football stuff. But in terms of getting behind the club, these guys have been great. People that we're talking to there want to be able to invest. What they've also been brilliant about is saying to us, look, you've got a job in your hands to be able to get the Rollins investment done, get that money in the bank. That's the most important step next. Once that's done, come back to us and talk to us. And that's exactly what the plan is.
Well, a couple of final questions before we do move on to the football matters. Obviously, there was an announcement during the week, or perhaps the week before, around government support for football. And my understanding is it's loans at a higher level, and then it's a grant at the lower level, and Falkirk at the moment stand to receive £150,000. What's your immediate reaction to that from a board perspective?
And you're absolutely right in terms of that split, Lewis. What's coming to Championship League 1 and League 2 is in round terms about £10 million. There's a bit more than that because of national lottery funding. That's going a lot of money is going out to non-league clubs and women's football and all the rest of it as well. But in broad terms, £10 million is coming to Championship, League One and League Two. If you'd asked me at the start, would I be happy with 150,000? I would have said yes, because that's a fantastic boost for us in these really difficult times as we face the next 5 months to the end of the season. Springtime vaccines, hopefully getting fans back in and so on, which I'm sure we'll come back to as well. So it's a great shot in the arm for us, and it's great for Scottish football. The Scottish Government have come forward and put that funding package together. I'll take a deep breath because my next reaction is horror and anger that 50% of that £10 million goes to the Championship. So we're sitting here on Boxing Day just before the Partick game, and you've got 2 full-time clubs in League One, and that's not to excuse how we performed, but that's where we are. But we both get £150,000. If you look at some of the Championship clubs who have got lower fan bases, part-time, lower revenue, nothing against them, but why do they deserve more than 3 times what we're getting? This COVID funding was to make sure that businesses, clubs and businesses, football is a business, can survive through the COVID crisis. Now, I come from a business background. If I'm applying for businesses that I work for at the moment, if we're applying for bank funding or loan funding or grant funding, they'll look at the individual circumstances of the individual businesses or clubs. That's not been done here. And they've taken a blanket and thrown it across the Championship and said £500,000 each. And they've taken another blanket and they've thrown it across us in £150,000 each, not looking at individual need. So I'm angry at the lack of process around that. We were asked by the SFA, SPFL to put in individual revenue figures and cost figures a couple of months ago as they were lobbying the Scottish Government to be able to get money in the first place. So most, not every, something like 38 out of the 42 clubs put that detailed information in to the governing authorities. They've not used that. So the SFA and the SPFL have not used that data to try and allocate that in a fair and reasonable basis. Usual Falkirk kicking against the system again, but again, it's the usual Falkirk being shafted by the system.
Do you know, I'm glad you kind of gave that bit of information there, because my next question was going to be, if I was to pick teams in the Championship at random, so Alloa or Arbroath, you know, all due respect to them, not the biggest teams, I mean that in no disrespectful way at all, but compared to Partick, who were playing today, my question was going to be, surely somebody would have said Partick have an average crowd of 3,500 to 4,000, Falkirk similar, and respectfully to Alloa and Arbroath, maybe it's, you know, a couple of thousand, and surely there must have been some kind of data that could have helped drive that. But it sounds like almost what you're saying, the data was there, it's just not been taken into account. The
data was supplied, and we were asked, as I say, for lobbying purposes to be able to provide that data to the SFA, SPFL. So we did provide that. I think it was 38 out of 42 clubs provided it, and it's been used for speaking to Scottish Government about the support that Scottish football requires through this, and I would agree with that. But then it's been ignored in the allocation of the funds, and that's wrong.
I guess lastly, just on that side of things, in terms of finances, with the possibility that fans, you know, returning, we're sitting here on Boxing Day, we're talking about a potential vaccine, but the rollout, you know, they're saying might not be until Easter, which in my eyes, suddenly you're only 4 or 5 weeks from the end of the season at that point. So potentially if fans are not back in this season, how are the club looking to handle what must be a sore financial hit at the moment?
Sore's probably an understatement, to be honest, Lewis. I mean, it's horrendous. But we planned at the beginning of the season, when we're setting our budgets, for various scenarios, including no fans. So is this hurting us financially? Absolutely, of course it is. There's no club in the land, no business in the land that's not hurting it financially at the moment. So of course it's hurting us. But part of our plan about funding, about attracting new investment, about taking government support where we could get and government grants where we could get it, was all to do with the fact that we always thought that there was a real possibility of not having fans for the full season. There was a lot of talk out there about fans having been in by now. And that we were all loved that. But the reality is we had to plan on a different basis. So financially, we looked at making sure that we could get through this situation without without fans. That's where we are. So when we get to the end of the season, we'll still have money in the bank as a result of everything we've talked about, investment, government support, and so on. I really, truly hope that you're right, that by springtime we're getting some fans back who can see us, hopefully, touch wood, win this league and get back to the championship. That would be great. If we can get to that point, that's fantastic. Financially, it's not going to make a big difference to us, but emotionally, that would be huge.
We're sitting here on Boxing Day prior to the Partick Thistle game, which obviously has been brought forward due to the floodlight issues. Do you need me to go and get my torch? And what's the latest with that one? Yeah.
We need a few torches. Yeah, so just to give a bit of background, Lewis, so everybody understands, I think it was a week past Thursday, the guys were doing maintenance work up in both floodlight towers. And found, and I'm talking light maintenance work, so when they were up there, they found in the south tower a significant crack. Now, those that you can think of it, we've got the towers and we've got the platform, and then we've got the lighting rig above the platform. So it was the bit that joins the lighting rig to the tower, effectively, found a significant crack in that. We examined the north tower as well. There's a crack in it, but not as significant. So we called in the engineers, the structural engineers, immediately. On the Friday, we were advised that the south tower was dangerous and had to come down. And we couldn't play until that came down. The advice from the structural engineer was if it was strong wind, and we're sitting here on Boxing Day with 40-mile-an-hour winds, if a strong wind had come along, that tower could have come down. So we had to dismantle the lighting rig and bring that down. The north tower is safe. And we've been told that that's safe for us to be able to do. We'll need remedial work on it, but it's safe. So where we are is the lighting rig's been taken down. We've had to move games earlier in the day. That will be out of commission for at least 4 to 5 weeks. And we're looking at temporary solutions. Lots of torches or temporary rigging or playing games early in the day. But that will have to be where we are until we get the permanent fix in, let's say, 5 to 6 weeks.
In terms of football matters, we're obviously a couple of days ahead of the January transfer window. Can we expect to see many comings and goings from a club football perspective?
Ultimately up to David and Lee. That's what we've told them. We back their judgment, and so far that's working. The guys are doing tremendously well. I think they put together a really strong squad, I think stronger than we've had, and we're sitting top of the league, so we're happy. We'd like a wee bit more clear blue water at the top, but hopefully in due course that will happen. So up to Lee and David, there are a couple of positions where I know that they want to be able to strengthen, but there's no need for wholesale changes. I was thinking about this as well in terms of where we've been over the last few years and the amount of turnover that we've had in players. It's probably right we don't have wholesale changes because that's where we've suffered in the past. So we've got a good, strong squad. It will need strengthened in key areas. That's what the guys are concentrated on, but there won't be massive ins and outs.
And just finally, I'd like to talk about a little bugbear of mine. I think everybody knows my feelings on the academy. There's been talk at the AGM about finding support to reinstate an academy in some level, perhaps not the level it was at, but to allow the reintroduction of youth development at the club and a pathway through to the first team. Now, we obviously had Alan Gow come in as a director of football. Things unfortunately didn't work out, but can you tell us what are the plans to fill that director of football role? Is that still on the agenda? And lastly, what about the academy and more so youth development?
Yeah, so a couple of things there, and I'm glad you brought up the director of football thing. Go back to the share issue and about ownership and the right people and all the rest of it. Alan was too obsessed focused, choose your word, on ownership and not enough focus on the football, which is why we ultimately parted ways. So it's important that we have somebody in place to advise the board and to assist Lee and David strengthen things as we go forward into different leagues and pushing forward for the future. So we are speaking to candidates at the moment, and we should be making an announcement on that in the new year. good candidates. We've been really pleased by the enthusiasm that they've got for Falkirk Football Club, which I think says something about where we're going as well. All of a sudden, people are seen as an attractive proposition again, which is brilliant. That's great. So we're confident we'll have good quality director of football in place, or an advisor to the board and to the guys in place, whatever the title is, technical director or whatever. So we'll have somebody in place in the new year for that. Key part of their job there is to start that pipeline of youth development again. And now, will that be a development squad, a B team, call it what you will, first? More than likely, because we're not going to start from scratch right back at the beginning again. We've got to start in small steps and then build that over time. But it's essential for the club that we see good talent coming through for the first team. It's essential from a business point of view as well, that we've got talent that can trade on and move on.
Because the academy kept the club alive, essentially, didn't it?
Absolutely. There's no club in Scottish football, no club now in Scottish football. You look at what's happening at Celtic and at Rangers, and they're talking about cashing in on their key assets. There's the Ryan Kents of this world. There's no club in Scottish football can't be a club that needs to be, or we need to be a club that's focused on selling. And building development talent and bringing it through to be able to improve the squad, but ultimately to enhance it financially as well. So that has to be a key element of the role and the plan that the new director of football, technical director, will have. And we've spoken to that about in speaking to the candidates we're speaking to as an essential part of the recruitment process. What's their view on how you bring that back? Is it the right thing to be able to do? If the answer is no, the conversation doesn't go forward. It has to be part of our DNA going forward. So that's part of the club.
Well, Gary, we'll let you take a breath at that point. I think we've been fairly conclusive with some of the things we've covered and the breadth of coverage. So first of all, thank you for that, because I know as a fan myself, it was, we weren't sure how all these things were developing in the background. So thank you for covering all that and your time today. I guess that just leaves us to say, well, hopefully we'll get a result this afternoon. We'll see how that one goes, and Happy New Year when the time comes. And to you and to everybody. Hopefully we're sitting clear at the top of the table after the game today. The weather's horrendous, so we'll see how it plays out. It'll be a bit of a lottery. But no, we're in a good position. And we need to put the foot to the floor and make sure that we can win the league, get out into the championship, and start powering forward from there on as well. So thanks again, Lewis. As always, thanks for your time.
Cheers.